Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome to Eldridge and Company. Today I'm going to visit with my old friend Les Leopold. He's the founder and executive director of the Labor Institute and the author of 4 books, the most recent one being Runaway Inequality, an activist's guide to economic justice. Thank you and welcome to you, Les.
Thanks for having me.
I looked at an old program you and I did, which was shortly after Trump was elected. It was in December of 2016, so it was before he was inaugurated. And we talked about the shock and what was going to happen and whether or not it was going to be a catalyst to some kind of explosion of consciousness and activity in the country, right? And you had a doubt about it, the Democratic Party, and whether it was going to continue this old line power-directed party it's been. And so let's talk about that. How has it come? What do you think the result of this has been?
Well, I mean, where I'm at now is, I'd vote for Simon Legree over Trump. I think, getting rid of him is absolutely paramount. So in a way, I'm not as worried about the Democratic Party. What I am worried about is the relationship between the virus, police brutality and discrimination in general, and runaway inequality. I think we're at a very important juncture where we are seeing the way runaway inequality is kind of ripping the society apart. I had hoped, and I think many people had hoped, that in time of crisis, we would come together because we would face a common problem. Okay. The virus isn't playing out that way. I've been doing extensive research now on New York City and trying to figure out how many are the deaths related to racial discrimination, immigration, or income. And it turns out that the biggest impact on the virus is whether or not you're rich or not. And if you have money, you're out of the way. You've left.
But
anyway, that worries me.
Entails, though, that from that we got a lot of different points coming, because if you're wealthy, you're living in a better neighborhood, in larger apartments, right? I mean, it is so determined. It's so much part of discrimination and racism. It's just so much.
Here's the interesting thing. We examined 2,047 different census tracts. So basically 2,047 different neighborhoods. And it's absolutely remarkable, the differences that you can see by income as well as race. So the richest neighborhoods, those that are over $250,000 median, halfway point, the census stops counting after 250,000. They write 250,000 plus. Well, there's 40 neighborhoods in New York that are 250 plus. So we compared them to those that are under 25,000. And of course, the virus rate is like, 1/3 in the rich, as extreme in the rich neighborhoods. And the Hispanic and Black population is enormous in the poor neighborhoods and non-existent in the right. White neighborhoods. But if you, I guess, limit it to Manhattan, because I know that best, if you went into the areas of the highest income and did an attendance inventory, you would find that they weren't even here. Of course, they have other places to go. Yeah. I heard a funny story. A friend of mine was, there was a meeting of a fancy publisher, and it was a staff meeting on Zoom, and they were talking about cutbacks. And the president of the company was on his yacht during the meeting talking about cutbacks.
I know.
So it's incredible. But we did something that was what we've done that's different than anybody else, and it's all preliminary so far. I can't say this is like a peer-reviewed study or anything close to it. But there's a way to compare the relative impact of, we compared whether you're rich, white, African American, Hispanic, 65 years and older. Those variables can be separated, and you can compare them all at the same time to figure out which one's having the greatest impact. In other words, which one is the one most likely to either expose you or protect you from the virus. And it turns out that income is number one. Number two is over 65. And then number three is whether you're white or not. And then 4 and 5 is Anglo and Hispanic. And it turns out that there is an independent impact just on race. In other words, if your neighborhood, if you take a black neighborhood and you increase the number of black people by a certain amount, the deaths will go up by about 10 per 100,000. And if you do the same in an Anglo neighborhood, the deaths go down by 13 by 100,000. And if you do the same for a rich neighborhood, they go down by 25 deaths per 100,000.
But isn't that what we call ghetto areas, ghettos?
Well,
doesn't that go back?
Yes, but here's what I'm worried about.
Yeah.
This is why I kind of got into this. Somewhere in the middle of, or early May, we started to see all these reports on the disproportionate impact on Black and brown people. And what was happening in my mind, and what I was hearing from some of the scientific discussions, was it was almost getting towards Black and brown, or Black especially, African American biology. I heard a report saying, well, you know, these 10 people in Louisiana, these 10 Black men, elderly Black men, all died with the same kind of, lung problem. So maybe there's something about Black people. And this scared me, because this was taking us back to, scientific racism.
Right.
So first of all, there is a differential, a disproportional impact on Black people and brown people, especially in New York City, but also in Chicago. We've done it. We've now started to do the study in Chicago, but there's also a powerful impact on income, and we can't take poverty out of the equation, because what makes a ghetto in America is not just discrimination on race. It's also what keeps people there is discrimination on income. They can't afford to live where I live and where you live.
Exactly. Right. All of this, I'm really, I'm always optimistic, but I'm also, I think that finally we have an opportunity to really change the world. And as far as I was concerned, Black Lives Matter, police violence, definitely the difference in, people who've had the virus. And finally, Black Lives Matter, to go back to it, I'm a little disorganized, has mobilized
Fantastic.
Into a wonderful thing. I mean, I think that people who are demonstrating and out there and complaining and voting, because I think that we will see some people who are from that progressive part, people who haven't been part of the power structure, winning in these elections. I mean, we have one in Manhattan, New York, where I think Eliot Engel has been defeated, although the votes haven't been counted for the absentee ballot, by a Black man named Bowman, who really galvanized the district and the spirit. It all took me back, actually, to when I worked in City Hall many years ago with John Lindsay. He was the vice chair of the Kerner Commission, which Johnson set up after riots in the major cities, right? And what was that? It was economic, for jobs, housing, all kinds of things, the same kind of racism and discrimination we still have.
Look, you're absolutely right on several counts. One, the Black Lives Matter demonstrations have been remarkable. I mean, and what I'm hoping is that somehow Black Lives Matter fuses with Occupy Wall Street, because we have to understand what's the role of the police in low-income communities. What's the role? The role is to basically occupy the area, so-called make it safe. They're also a conduit for filling up the prison system. And because we have the largest number of prisoners in the world, and it started with runaway inequality, by the way, not in the 50s and 60s and 70s, started in 1980, the number goes up and up and up. And it's the tax collector. We have incredible evidence to show that fines and forfeitures, the things that they asked police to do, like in Ferguson, where Michael Brown got killed, they doubled the request of the police to get fines and forfeitures so they could fulfill their budget. They doubled the contribution. So that's all happening. And what I'm hoping is that the Kerner Commission idea doesn't get lost. The common denominator between the virus, in my opinion, there are two common denominators between the virus and the police brutality. One is race and the other is poverty. The people in jail are poor, white, black, brown. They are poor. They go into prison with an income of $20,000 or less. And it's disproportional. Yes, too many black men, way too many black men. But we have to keep poverty on the table. And I'm going to go bold here. I think the demand has to be something like, well, let me preface this. We don't blame African Americans for discrimination. We don't, right? It's not their fault. They're getting discriminated against. Yet when it comes to poverty, we start thinking about individual responsibility, and we should give them more opportunities, quote unquote. And we should provide, and look, some of the people make it, some of them make it to Stanford and Harvard and other places, and it's somehow the problem of the poor. But the Kerner Commission understood it's not the problem of the poor, it's the problem of the structure. You talk about systemic racism or structural racism. There's a structure to runaway inequality that creates and recreates poverty. The answer to poverty is nobody should ever have to work on a full-time job and not earn a living wage. So a guaranteed job at a living wage for anybody who can and should work has got to be part of our demands. It's interesting. In the McDonald's in Denmark, McDonald's pays $22.50 an hour, right? Plus they get 4 weeks paid vacation, free higher education, free healthcare. Now, why can't we do it here? We can't do it here because the system is predicated on sucking money out of everybody and putting it up to the super rich. The people, who've got 10 million or more in assets would go crazy if they actually had to pay people a living wage. But we can no longer have a situation where someone works full-time and still has to get full-time, right, to support themselves or their family, and they still have to go on food stamps or Medicaid, because they can't make ends meet working full-time. What kind of job is that? And I don't think we can solve, let's put it this way, we can go a long way to solving police brutality with the movement that's going on now, and it's absolutely, totally necessary. But we're not really going to solve the problem until we absolutely put an end to poverty in America. And why should the richest country in the history of the world have any poverty at all? And that's structural racism, because most of those people, or too many of those people, disproportionately are black and brown. There's white people too, but too many of them are black and brown.
I've been wanting to ask you this for a long time. How do you explain the stock market with the ratings high and the poverty low? I mean, with people so poor, or the average salary.
Well,
explain it.
There's two parts of it. One is there are two. Okay, yes, there are two parts. One part is that the stock market is about profits. So if corporate America and the financial elites are milking the rest of society, and there's nothing stopping it, right? The labor movement isn't strong enough to stop it. The people's movement isn't yet strong enough to stop it. Then the money keeps going to the top. The stock market has upward pressure indefinitely. That's one. Two, the Federal Reserve has basically guaranteed that corporations aren't going to go under, or not as many. are going to go under because they're going to buy corporate bonds right and left, and with basically hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars, and they're guaranteeing the financial system won't collapse. So you can invest in banks and not have to worry. They're not going to go under. They're not going to let another Lehman Brothers happen. So both those things conspire to push the profits up. It has an inverse relationship to poverty. The lower the wages are, the better the profits are going to be.
Right. It's so amazing that we have Donald Trump, who bases everything on that stock market rating, doesn't he?
Yes, he does. But the one thing he can't get out of right now is, I wrote something over a month ago, and I said there's going to be 250,000 deaths by election day, 5 times the Vietnam War. Everybody's going to know somebody dead in this country, and it's going to be hard to call it a hoax. I think 250 might be an underestimation now. He can't get out of that. He can't. We're going to have the worst death rate in the world if this keeps going on amongst the major countries. I don't know how he gets around that. So he can brag all he wants about the stock market. He can jump up and down. Also, I'm not convinced the stock market will keep going up, because if the virus gets out of control and we have to shut down economic activity, even the stock market will notice that.
Right. So do you think that there's any chance that we're going to have a Democratic Party that is going to change this, what you call, I think you call it the neoliberal ideology?
You know, that's up for grabs. That depends on whether or not the movement being built now by Black Lives Matter and others has the staying power, and whether it can expand for the full, for the full range of structural issues that are at play. All of this depends. It depends not so much on the Democratic Party. It depends on what we build around it and through it. When you were involved, look what was behind you, right? The country was really moving in many directions, and somebody like you had a voice because people knew that you were in tune with what was going on out there, and they listened. Also, you were good at what you were doing, but still, it didn't depend on the Democratic Party. It depended on what was pushing the Democratic Party.
Right.
So we'll see. If more good people get elected and our movement doesn't collapse. But I'll tell you, in a way, I'm not worried about that. I want this guy out of office. He is I'll tell you, he's making Richard Nixon look good.
Definitely. It's amazing. We have had so many different experiences. The CIA, we were applauding them. The FBI, they were
Bolton, John Bolton. We're actually happy that John Bolton is opening his mouth.
Right. What you have always worried about were the independent silos. That's what you called it, right? Of interest. So we want that to be that one, everybody under the same roof, right?
I know I've been really, really thinking about that and figuring out how to deal with it. Identities are so important to people. You can't say stop being an environmentalist or you need to be broader than that, or you can't, how can you say that to people who are fighting police brutality that's, live in color on television? You can see it. There's no doubt about, online lynching. So the identities are strong. I think all we can hope for is that there's a desire to link up because all the groups need it. All the groups need more political power to win what they want to win. And hopefully there's some sense of movement building, coalitional attitude that can link people up. I was hoping it would be even, kind of a broader coming together. But I don't think we can stand in the way of these very, very powerful identities. People see themselves as environmentalists or racial activists or whatever. And what are you going to say? Climate change is important, and police brutality is important, and runaway inequality is important. So we're just hoping people can understand that they need each other to win. And I hope you are right. I hope this is the moment of fantastic structural change. The piece that's missing, the reason I'm maybe not as optimistic as you are, God bless you, is is the organizational infrastructure that keeps it together. So in the 60s, 50s and 60s, you had that capacity being built in the civil rights movement, but you also had a fair amount of labor backing, and they had a big infrastructure. So when, for jobs and freedom, you had a huge labor infrastructure to help build the March on Washington. Of course, it all fell apart around the Vietnam War, but even the early Vietnam War demonstrations had some of the progressive unions providing some resources. So where's that infrastructure? Is it our revolution? Well, our revolution turned into it's the Bernie campaign. Can it grow into that? I don't think it has the capacity yet. So and we saw what happened with Occupy Wall Street, had no infrastructure and disappeared. I think Black Lives Matter's got more infrastructure, but can it build one broad enough to hold us all together and take and challenge the powers to be? I don't know.
That was my next question, is what's happening to the labor movement? Is there a movement?
Yeah, there is. Yeah.
I mean, certainly the country has not been at all in favor of labor's rights, right?
Well, it's interesting that I think the attitude towards unions has actually improved in the last few years. And there was the strike activity all the way or the activity from Fight for 15 to the West Virginia teachers strikes, that's LA and whatnot. So there's rumblings there, but it's a very it's a very difficult time because the labor law is so stacked against traditional organizing. So it remains, there's a vacuum to be filled. It remains to be seen whether unions will innovate in such a way that they can become part, provide some infrastructure. Unfortunately, a lot of the time is spent in sheer survival mode.
Yeah,
because they're being attacked and job loss, et cetera, et cetera. So they have to be part of the story, that's for sure. Whether they'll be the key to the story, when they were 25 to 30%, I'd say absolutely have to be.
Well, does the Democratic Party platform, to go back to that establishment, do they not have in their platform to get rid of the right to work laws?
Yeah, they've had it in there since 1948.
But if they get control of the House and the Senate?
I went around this block in 1976 when Jimmy Carter was elected, and didn't he have a veto-proof Congress at the time? And they couldn't get the bill up.
Why?
Oh, there were too many business-oriented Democrats. They didn't want to deal with it. They felt that they were getting support from large corporations, said no. So Democrats have had it in their platform since Taft-Hartley, right? 1947. So it's been in the platform all the way from 48 onward, more or less. There were some, but to make the move requires a lot of guts because of the way funding of elections take place.
Right. But we have to hope that all the deregulation that has gone on since Reagan, maybe, I am sounding so optimistic. I can't even believe myself.
Can you share your meds? I mean, it's obviously you're in a good mood.
I don't know. Tell me about your program with the unions about the runaway inequality.
What we're working on right now is we're trying to bring COVID-19 and police brutality, structural racism deeper into the runaway inequality curriculum. And so, for example, we have found out that the biggest hospitals in the country made $30 million the year before last, and they spent 70% of their profits on stock buybacks. They've been financially strip mining. So we got some interesting stories to tell, how it fits together. I was wondering, why were the hospitals so unprepared? Why weren't there enough ICU beds at the beginning? What happened? Well, it turns out the 7 largest hospitals made something like $35 billion in profits the year before year or two ago. They spent 70% of their profits on stock buybacks. Not on ICU, not on beds, ICU units, staff, et cetera. In fact, they're squeezing their staff. They're short staffing their hospitals.
Right.
We work with a lot of nurses groups that are just going, were going out of their mind before the virus hit because they couldn't provide quality care. So we've turned hospitals, or allowed them to become financial strip mining operations to get money, because all the stock buybacks end up, in the pockets of the elites. Another example, nursing homes. About 80% are privately owned. And there was a recent story in the Times about how they're kicking out patients to get higher paying COVID patients. But the other thing that was mentioned earlier, but now hasn't been discussed as much, is a bunch of them have bought up by private equity companies. Then they split the operation into the property and to the operations.
So we have a bottom line. So I want everybody to look at the website of Runaway Inequality. It will explain what they're doing and what they're trying to explain, as Les has just done. And then after you've looked at Runaway Inequality, go to the Labor Institute and find out more about all of the work that they do. But thank you very much, and I'll see you next week.